Hi and welcome to episode 15 of The Green Room. I am Nick, once again joined today by James.
Hi Nick, how are you?
I'm very well.
Excellent.
How are things? How's the week?
Yeah, very good. Looking forward to the long bank holiday weekend.
Are you got anything up your sleeve?
I'm going down to Bath for the weekend.
Very nice.
Yeah, very exciting. What about yourself?
Got the wellies. It's going to be one of those bank holidays, I think.
So I don't understand. Just before we start, I was looking at the weather literally 1 week ago, right? And it said it was going to be 23 in Bath this weekend.
Right.
So sunny. So I've got my shorts already. It's still sunny, but it's gone down by 10 degrees. It's now 13 degrees. This is hugely disappointing. So anyway, I'm not very excited about the weather, to be honest, this weekend. But I'm excited about getting out of London for a few days. What about yourself?
Very good. I was going up to the Midlands tomorrow, so that should be interesting stuff.
Why is that? What are you doing?
Worcester to Birmingham. No, just seeing a few like-minded businesses.
Good.
And community leaders should be quite fun.
Excellent.
So action-packed bank holiday for me.
Excellent. Sounds like yours is going to be far more stressful than mine.
Anyway, so talking about new values today.
Yes.
Just wanted to kind of get to the business end of the podcast. And why they're important and why there's a much bigger focus in construction and new builds.
Yeah.
I think we're going to talk about something else today, but we thought U values were quite important. We
went on a course.
We went on a course. That's why.
So we went to school last Friday to learn all about them.
It's quite nice to be back in the classroom.
It was nice to be back in the classroom, but when we get the detail of this wrong,
yes,
we can blame it squarely on
the lunches were good. That's why I remember.
The lunches were delicious. However, right. So U values. What is a U value? Start off 10.
So start for 10, they are essentially a degree of how you measure heat loss in a fabric, I guess, or a building, or fabric element. So, and just to kind of explain the scale, so the bigger the U value, the worse performing that fabric is. So for example, if you've got an old house, it's going to have a very high U value for the different
So
elements.
you're looking for low numbers is better?
Low numbers is good, and basically, as we'll talk about over time, the regulations have got much tighter. So, i.e., the specifications to have low U values in refurbishments and new builds.
So we're looking for numbers closer to zero now.
Exactly.
Okay, fine. But it's basically it's just a measure of heat loss.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
Fine. And you can. I think the importance of it is that you can compare lots of different elements, right? So you can windows have a U value, walls have a U value, ceilings, floors, a whole lot. So every bit of the thermal envelope.
Yes, roofs.
The only thing exactly. So it's a great way of seeing how efficient your property is. It obviously doesn't take into account any of the heating element.
And it's the thing is. Because the degree of importance through regulations has increased, we're getting lots more and more questions about these things, and because people are trying to get their minds around how they work and what target they should hit.
Yeah.
And obviously, we refer to people most of the time to key documents, so you can look at the
is it Part L?
Part L of the building regulations. That's right, for conservation of fuel and power. So you've got different sections for existing build and new build, and domestic and non-domestic dwellings. And
so they're the targets. So we know we need to hit those and be better than those.
Yes.
You don't get penalised for going further.
No, and it's important to say that there's different kind of standards for methods of construction in terms of the ethos or the specification you're after. So for instance, some folk are after passive houses. You might have heard that term.
Yeah.
So that's where it's even more stringent than, say, what the building regulations would say. So if you go for passive house, that means you're effectively going for hardly going to use a heating source. It's all going to be
your
stored.
House with a candle type thing.
Exactly. So the theory is, you spark a match or a lighter, and then the fabric would contain. So it's so airtight and it's so good at heat retention through the fabric that effectively wouldn't need a lot of energy to keep the environment consistent. So and on my kind of surveying travels, I've had the pleasure of seeing a few projects like that. I have to say, ones where they do the The passive house on an existing building is incredibly difficult because literally they just tear everything apart, all the walls are down, and they just effectively rebuild it. But the only thing that looks remotely like the old building is probably a little bit at the front, like a feature.
Yeah, exactly.
But the rest of it is all kind of rebuilt.
Okay. Okay.
So, it's.
So, I'm going to. Harry has given some sort of questions, so I'll just plough through them and then essentially.
Because you can get incredibly technical. I think the purpose of what we're trying to do here today is we want to try and keep it low technical, but kind of keep the principles so people understand.
What we took from the training course.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. Okay, so first thing, how can heat transfer through building fabric? There's 3 methods of heat transfer.
Yeah. So
what are they?
So the most obvious one is say if you've got conduction. So say if you've got two elements that are butted to one another, and then you heat from one side and you've got the cold to the other. It's the degree of how the heat is transferred from the one element to the other to the outside bit, because obviously heat goes from a warm source to a cold source.
Yeah, you see, I listened to that training. I was going to ask a question because I don't think that's right. I think there will always, this is what I got from my chemistry, but I always thought that an equilibrium would try to be met, essentially. So if you've got something hot and something cold, eventually, if you left that for 10 years, they will eventually be the same temperature both sides. Yeah, so I didn't think it was hot to cold.
But
because it's also cold
to
hot.
That answers your question, doesn't answer your question because it's trying to equalise itself. So
it is, but they said it was specifically from hot to cold, but I think it goes the other way as well. And it just tries to meet this equilibrium. Anyway,
so in the summer when it's hotter outside, in theory, the heat is trying to go into the house where it's potentially cooler. Yeah. But anyway, so on the conduction materials, so you've got really poor conductors. Yeah. So those materials actually be good insulators. So the inverse is good. So for instance, my polystyrene or rock wool insulation would be a very poor conductor of heat, but an excellent insulator. And so other common building materials are bad conductors, therefore good insulators. Wood. Yeah. Plastic, reasonably good. Mm-hmm. What else? Yeah, insulation materials, obviously. So sort of EPS, polystyrene, PIR board. That's right. Rock wool, that kind of thing. So they're all bad conductors, good insulators. And then flip it on the other side. Some of the baddies, so obviously metal. Aluminium surprised me. So I would assume that steel is like the worst. Yeah. Aluminium is a far better conductor and therefore a far worse insulator. Mm-hmm. So aluminium is really bad in terms of. I think copper would be even higher because you use it in electricity. Yeah, electricity probably. So you need a higher. You need a higher kind of heat to pass through it. Maybe. Is this my GCSE? Is this my GCSE science coming back? It could be. Today? Yeah. But anyway, so aluminium, steel, basically any metals. So that's why we get things called cold bridging, which we're going to come on to. Anyway, so conduction's one. So that's conduction. So through convection currents. Yeah. So really good example, radiator being on, right? And so hot air rises, and so you get convection within cavities of walls. Yes. So in a cavity wall, you see convection currents. And that's why you might want to not only improve the fabric, but also stop the air movement because. As we know. Yes. Interesting. And then, so that's convection. Final one. Radiation. So if I've got, the easiest example so if I'm outside on a wintry day. Cold winter's day and the sun is shining. The sun's shining and you've got infrared rays travelling through the light spectrum, but it's the transfer from one solid object to the other. So obviously the air is a certain temperature, but then, if you're facing the sun, you're kind of absorbing all that radiance. So it travels unimpeded. Correct. From one source to t'other, and then basically you feel it, which is why the sun can heat the earth. And it was interesting when they were talking about kind of insulants within the course. So if you've got foil back materials, they're kind of quite good at sort of repelling that. Reducing, what's the word? I can't say it. There are a few words. No, it's emissivity. That's it, emissivity, is it? But it's something like emissivity, but I can't pronounce it. I have a problem trying to pronounce that word. I will spell it, and people listening can try and work out how you'd say it. Okay, so they're my 3 ones. So
convection, conduction, and radiation. When everyone gets terrified when they hear the words radiation, put people's minds at rest.
It's just the transfer of heat from one source to the other that's unimpeded, so it's not, you're not going to be fried.
Fine.
It's a different
different
going back to my
areas,
GCSE,
the electromagnetic spectrum.
That's it.
Fine. So it's all safe in theory.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're the three methods. Now the main one in properties is what? Conduction, right?
Yes.
And so that's the big one. That if we can minimise, then we're obviously going to save money, heat, etc.
Hence what we said. So obviously, from a materials perspective, then you want a poor conductor, a high insulator. So some of the things that we were talking about earlier. But what I was going to say is, maybe it's just worth to, because we talk about the fabric all the time, and in terms of those heat losses, identifying in a home. So if you were to look at the fabric, what would you say kind of percentage losses were?
Ooh.
Through the different elements.
So, I would say through the walls, 30%, 35%. Through the roof, about 25%.
Correct.
Through windows, because there's not many, if you look at
Depends
the
on the
surface
size
area,
but
5 to 10%.
Yeah.
Floors, 10-15%.
Spot on.
Really?
Yeah. Well done.
Seriously.
So someone pays attention.
But I don't know if that added up to 100. But
it's sort of, I
close.
think it just goes slightly over or under. But as you said, it depends on the property type, the kind of the heat loss perimeter you've got in the property in relation to the surface area and those sorts of things.
But things that we can easily fix. So number one is ceiling. We've done loft insulation now. We talked about it for a long time. And so loft is one that we can really easily target. And so we can take the higher U value of an uninsulated loft right down. So we save, basically we're slowing the movement of heat from inside the property to the outside. And therefore I need less hot air. Therefore my heating system needs to be on less. So I save money. Walls is another one that's relatively easy to target.
So depending upon the wall type you've got, so cavity walls we talked about.
Solid walls, so you can put internal wall insulation, external wall insulation, all these other things. Windows, another reasonable one.
Yeah.
Windows is always a bit tricky because, insulants tend to be not clear, essentially.
Yes.
As in, you need to be able to see through your window. And so glass isn't great. And so you're taking it from a really bad U value to a marginally better U value. I think kind of the best windows you're looking are about 0.7 or 0.8, which isn't great, really, compared to like a wall that can get down to 0.1, to be honest, if you put enough insulation. But windows, they can be replaced and they make a big difference. And then draft proofing. How does draft proofing affect U values?
So it's more on through the current losses. So basically, if you can stop the cold air moving from the cold source to your warm heated room or bedroom, then the comfort factor increases. Okay, fine. So but when we go down to the calculations, we'll kind of explain a little bit more. Okay, I have an acronym written down in front of me. TFEE. TEFI. What does TEFI mean? So basically, the not kind of reading it out. What exactly? So it's targeting the fabric first, essentially. So in 2013-14, regulations came out, particularly in England and some aspects in Wales. So when they were building new homes, you've got to achieve a certain carbon reduction. So it's all about saving the planet. It's all about reducing emissions. And when you're constructing that property, in the past, there was a kind of element of let's stick a wind turbine. Let's put solar panels because that's zero carbon.
But a heat pump when it's not really appropriate.
But actually, no one's tackling the fundamentals, which is the walls, the windows, what you're talking about.
So basically, what you're saying is the envelope is more important than the heating.
So now it's not only have you got carbon targets to reach, you've also got thermal energy efficiency targets, which is essentially what the TEFI.
What does TEFI actually stand for?
TEFI stands for. I had to look it up.
Right.
It's targeting fabric. So target fabric energy efficiency.
Okay.
And so, as I said, it came in England in 2013-14.
So it's basically all it's saying is it's fabric first approach. We're going to attack the insulation, try and improve that before we, focus on the heating.
Yeah, exactly.
Get us to where we need to be.
Because the thing is, if you just stick on renewables, it's kind of cheating a bit. You're kind of wasting on the one hand, but using lots of.
You're getting exactly. You're kind of ticking the box you need to in terms of in the old school of thinking. You're ticking the box in terms of energy efficiency, but you're not actually sorting out the root cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's about the root, and I think it's a good approach. I can only see it. I can see it becoming more stringent over time.
Yeah.
Now you've also got so it's not just so you've got the kind of the U value targets. You've also got kind of the air pressure testing. So for air infiltration rates. And you've also got mechanical ventilation. So obviously, the more you add to a fabric, the more airtight you make it.
Mm-hmm.
You've also got to think about how latent air then starts to move in a very insulated fabric.
Okay.
So when they're constructing homes like that, a lot of them now would come with mechanical extracts or mechanical heat recovery systems and so forth, just to kind of increase that efficiency by a few notches, which is actually very important.
Okay, good. So that leads us. So we talked about roughly what U values are, the heat transfer methods, and the main one we're trying to sort out here, which is conduction.
Yeah.
What TEFI stands for, and so we're going for this fabric first approach.
Yes.
So I have a wall, and I want to know what the U value is. How would I calculate that?
So at a very high level, you would I'm looking at my wall from a cross-sectional point of view. So say I take a butter knife and I can sort of slice my wall. I can see it from the side view. So from the inside, I might see some plaster boards potentially. And then as you go further into the fabric, you then see the underlying blockwork and brickwork. You might have a cavity there, depending upon if you've got a cavity wall.
Yeah.
That might be, that might have some insulation there, might not have insulation. And then you'll have your outer skin. So typically it's either brick, it's block, or it's kind of a combination of the two with sort of a rendered finish.
Okay.
Or that's a very kind of masonry type construction. You can have a timber house. So if you look cross sectionally, you can see timber studs coming through, or it could be a metal frame house,
or it could be ICF.
ICF, yeah. So, but essentially, you're taking all those elements. You're looking at the thickness. You're working of each element, and then each element has a lambda or thermal conductivity.
Yeah.
And obviously the lower that number is, the better it is. And then the U value is kind of the thermal conductivity for a given thickness.
Yeah.
And then you'd add them all up, and it goes into kind of a.
It's a calculator. I mean, we use calculators now. And the reason being, I guess, is...
It'll just take you hours and hours to do one.
Well, what you've just done there is relatively simplistic. Useful, but relatively simplistic. I think when we're in real life situations...
And that's actually... So they have three ways to calculate it, and that's actually the simplified model. So
okay.
That's what I mean by that. So it's just taking the really simple elements of the fabric, finding out its conductivity, adding up the values, and that's it.
But the issues are things like, if I have a brick wall, I have mortar joints, and the rate of heat transfer through mortar is different to the rate of heat transfer through, if you were to use block work, for example,
Correct.
A lightweight block, the heat transfer will be slower through that than the mortar joints.
Yes.
So the slightly more complicated method, which is called
the combined method,
takes into account, it kind of does a weighted average, doesn't it? So if I'm looking at one of these particular elements, i.e. blockwork, and it's got the mortar joints, it kind of takes a weighted average in terms of surface area depending on
you're right. So again, looking at it cross sectionally, so look at all the elements. If you were to have heat transferring from one side to the other, how that would move through fabric and through all the different elements.
Yeah.
And as you said, it will then just take a kind of assumed calculation that's within these. Again, it goes into the calculator, so that's why people.
And it takes into account things like wall ties, and cavities and that sort of thing.
Gaps. If you've got reflective insulation, for instance, so the emissivity, which I hope is right, and the combined method is the method that they use in and that's the one that SAP users and surveyors and assessors, and that's the method that be used to estimate for new builds and for various regulations.
And would that, so if I were to get a calculation off you now, would that suffice building control?
Hopefully soon. So I'm still doing my portfolio, James. Let's
right. Okay. Fine, but once
the portfolio's done and I've say proved competency in theory, yes. So if you were going to do because you were a qualified EPC assessor, so you're going to do a property, and you said, actually, can you work out the actual U value of this insulated wall? Theory, I could put it through the engine, give you that information in your RDSAP. You'd be able to actually put the U value in there, and that would bump up the EPC rating for that element, and hopefully overall as well. So
okay. Do you want to do what's final method?
So the final one, it's called numerical analysis, but it's very complex.
It basically models the property.
And I think that's what Alan will probably correct me next week, but I think it's what they use for stuff like level 5 commercial EPCs, because it's impossible to work it out. So it just kind of models. It takes a really complicated building.
Basically, we didn't learn it in our training, so we can't tell you too much about that one.
But it does exist. So for much more complex projects, there's much more sophisticated models that are out there.
And basically, just to say for people listening, and if you were listening, I just forgot to do this. Where would you listen to this podcast?
Can we do that at the end?
Anyway, no, but for listeners, so when you're putting this into the software, you're picking the different elements. That's essentially what it is. You're going in, there's a big database, and you pick the elements, and you pick the thicknesses, and you just bring them all together, and then it spits out a U value. So it sort of combines them all and spits out the U value based on their thermal conductivity of the individual elements and their thicknesses. I'm looking there. I mean, that is a lot of numbers, a lot of calculations.
It's a lot of numbers. The other thing I was going to say is, so kind of going back onto why the questions are getting asked, and particularly by people are kind of interested in our blogs, and because people are actually undertaking projects. So you can the U values that are assumed in the various tables of building regulations, for instance, are different to when you're refurbishing a property to when you're, say, building an extension as well. So we get a lot of questions like, what if I did external wall insulation and I did it to existing part of my house? Would that be different to a conservatory? And is conservatory considered a new build, or is it not new build? So it is, hopefully with this. Harry putting the right links about where you can get the building regulations, people can see what
we know walls. So should we do solid walls? So if you have a solid wall, if you need to, on an existing property and you're trying to improve it, you need to get the U value down to 0.3. If it is an extension on an existing building, you need to take the extension down to 0.28. If it is a new build,
we'll see if you know this one.
It's either 0.16 or 0.18.
It's the latter.
0.18.
0.18.
Okay.
But it
should be 0.16.
But you don't get penalised.
0.16
It's important to say if you get 0.16, you don't get penalised for having a lower U value.
Yeah, but it's interesting, because if you were to, in theory, if you did the rest of your house from 90mm insulation, EPS insulation, and you did the extension 90mm EPS insulation, in theory, you wouldn't hit the necessary U values. And
so, you wouldn't. So one thing just in case I don't forget. So one thing, of course, that wasn't really answered, and for me, it's a little bit unclear, is about how you treat cavity walls. So if you were to do external wall insulation. It was quite interesting. That I think we were both a bit surprised. Well, I don't think we were surprised. It was just interesting for them to say it. But basically, if you have an open cavity, i.e., air can come in and out of the cavity, anything you do outside of that isn't included in your U value calculation. So if I had insulation board on it, so if I've got the outside of the house and then I have insulation board, then I have one skin of brick, then I have a cavity, then I have another skin of brick and the plasterboard inside. Basically, my insulation and the outer skin don't count anything towards the U value of that wall. If that is an open cavity. Yes.
So that is really interesting, because people are going to spend a lot of money doing external wall insulation potentially, put it onto an open cavity wall, it's going to do nothing. It's and there's some other things as well. We've definitely come across it, and again, I don't know if it's properly answered really in the course, but we have people who are trying to hit U values up in roofs, up within the roof space, and they put insulation at joist level.
Yes.
And they also put insulation at rafter level.
Yes.
And they assume that you can add the two together.
Yes.
To get your proper overall U value calculation. And from what we were told, that's definitely not the case.
Yes.
You've got to, it's basically the one above the ceiling is the one you're going to be counting.
Correct.
Because then there will be airflow above it, and therefore it's irrelevant.
Yes.
Above it, so it was just quite interesting. I thought that one with the cavity wall was really interesting.
Yeah, because you just don't quite know. Because some, I guess, properties, the way they're designed, they probably have more open cavity than the ones that are designed differently. So I think every property behaves differently. So it might be, even if it's because you've got obviously ventilation holes at the bottom of your DBC to kind of allow for.
And it's very much a certain size vent in this cavity wall makes it either open or closed.
Yeah. So the way they use, I think in the end, the way I got that was they assume for the purposes of the calculations that all cavities are unvented cavities.
Yeah.
So actually,
well, they have to assume that, but in reality, the
property could behave differently. So it's a tricky one. So I guess to me that indicates that you'd probably look at doing cavity wall insulation, and then if you want to bump up the U value,
then you do it on the outside.
You do external wall insulation on that.
Talk to me a little bit. You mentioned it very briefly. Foil-backed insulation, partly because I wanted to try and pronounce that word again. But explain. Because we were. I think I was really interested by that. I've always wondered why the hell they put foil on the outside of insulation, but actually it makes an enormous difference, doesn't it, to U values? It really takes them low. Do you want to? It's
because it's reflective. So if you think about reflective surface, effectively what they're saying, so the radiant rays that are travelling through will reflect back into the fabric or the towards the heating source. So in theory, that would be acts like an insulator or inhibitor of
heat transfer
to the
because radiation is one of the heat transfer methods.
Because it comes back, i.e. reflects from the foil that you've.
But you need a bit of an airspace, right?
Yes.
So you need an airspace over 40 mil, I think you're saying, before it's really counted.
Yes.
And then anything less than that,
you just
less relevant.
Discontinue it.
But suddenly if you have this airspace within your build-up with foil-backed insulation, it can make a massive bearing on the U values, which I was surprised by.
Well, it's good. You learn something new every time, which is fantastic.
Snarky bastard.
No, well,
right.
I didn't. So I didn't.
I didn't know that either. I didn't know.
So it was good to.
What? Anything else you want to cover here?
I think that's U values, and what we'll probably do is obviously drop that into discussions in future podcasts, because they're always going to creep up. It's so relevant, such a hot topic when you're.
And we will be able to very shortly provide U value calculations.
Yes.
So we hopefully will be accredited U value calculation experts, and so if you do need help, they can give us a shout. So you happy that covers it? Do you want to touch on anything else?
No, I think so. I think we talked kind of briefly. Harry will when the podcast goes live on YouTube talk about different other ways very soon where you can find us. But yeah, so certainly if you want to watch us, on the bottom of all of our podcasts on YouTube, we have a text section where we explain just briefly what we've talked about,
and some of the links where you can find more info.
So you can hopefully then be able to read pile if that's what
floats your boat.
One thing I would say, what is an R value and how does that relate to a U value?
It is the reciprocal. So an R value is so U value equals 1 over R value. That I just don't know. I mean,
it's just a calculation.
It's a calculation. Silly question.
Don't ask us that question.
Oh dear. It is just a weird calculation because R is resistance, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so then, anyway, yeah.
So the higher the resistance, the better it is. So then you do one inverse of, and then
which is why your U value as a low number is better.
Yeah.
That's Rufus.
We've got a dog underneath the table. James' dog.
Okay, right. We're going to move on from that then.
So we're going to move on from U values, and so what's
embarrassed by Harry.
We can just talk a little bit about news this time around. So the Committee on Climate Change, so they're a body that sits, it's Quango effectively, it sits above government, and they're an independent body that look at kind of all aspects of climate change, the environment, etc. They report from time to time about how we're doing against our targets.
We're doing pretty well, aren't we? I mean, you wouldn't have thought so with all these people protesting in London, but we're doing better than our European counterparts. But go on, what have they done?
Is that just because we've been sunnier and it's been windier more than
potentially? Potentially, no. I think we're hitting it quite hard. I mean, we are actively encouraging people to put insulation in. We've nailed, cavity wall insulation, loft insulation have been done to death. External wall insulation is beginning to sort of find its feet as well. We've done windows due to those amazing adverts that say they save you, half your energy bills. Yeah. So they were all done in the late 80s, early 90s. So we've got decent heating systems coming in. However, they do have big plans.
Yes.
So go on, tell me more.
Well, so they've it's quite an ambitious report that they came out with, and effectively and maybe Harry can sort of jump in, but they want for the UK to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
Right.
Which is quite ambitious because we're. I mean, how does that link to the actual reduction themselves?
So the old plan was to, by 2050, have it reduced by 80%.
Is it from what level?
From 1990 levels.
Fine, okay.
Which we're kind of on target for, but now we've been the first nation to declare a climate change emergency.
Right.
So basically, we're trying to get it down. They said as close to zero as possible. There's a few things that they've said can't be done, such as Wales can only go down to 95% because of the agriculture there.
Right. What about Heathrow?
They've been asked about Heathrow, and they just completely dodged the question.
Fine, good idea. Good idea. Okay.
Dodging that happened.
But maybe if we had more runways, we'd have less congestion in the air, so hence we'd have less planes queuing. And
I saw an amazing video with this is not relevant to anything we're doing, but it was a round runway, right? And so if you look at YouTube, you just type round runway, and planes basically just fly, and they can just land on it all day long. It was a stupid video.
You don't mind the third runway? I've never asked you.
Yeah, I'm slightly NIMBY-esque. I mean, I wouldn't.
You're against it,
in my backyard, ideally. But whatever. If it means it'll help us grow.
We help the economy, yeah.
Yeah, I can't argue with that too much. Anyway.
The aviation sector said that they're going to try harder to get recycled...
pedal planes.
Yeah, basically. Making jet fuels from waste material. But the Centre for the Committee for Climate Change basically said it was rubbish.
I tell you what, right, when I came into this industry, I was a lot less sceptical than I am now. May not be true, but I am now more sceptical than I was, I'm sure. And I hear a lot of these things, and as much as I support a lot of these people's kind of ambitions to do really good things and make big change, some of them are just stupid. Right? Some of these ideas, banning boilers, right, by 2025 in new builds, is just so stupid. Can I have a rant really quickly? We get our power from gas power plants, right? So by banning something that's using gas, right, it means you're going to have to get something that runs on electricity, but you're making that electricity from gas anyway. It's just so stupid. Why the government? Yes. Anyway, right, sorry, rant over. So how are they going?
But then you see, you showed me something yesterday, it was on Sky News, wasn't it? So there's a poll on about UK consumer habits for meat, and what did that say?
It said that we've had these they weren't riots, no, we've had these folk in London protesting, and their main things were they want to reduce meat intake, they want to essentially ban any form of travel as far as I can tell. What else do they want to do? All these things, right? So there were a few things, and basically Sky interviewed several people, and the overall sort of picture of this poll was that no one agreed with what these guys were saying.
Right.
And that they still wanted to travel, and they still wanted to have a steak on a Saturday night,
Yeah.
and they still basically they wanted to do what they do now
Mm-hmm.
and not worry too much.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fundamental change. We probably will talk about in future episodes about eating meat and all this sort of stuff, and I love eating meat.
Yeah.
But it's why are you giggling there?
Nothing.
But it's it's a tricky one. Tricky one.
So Harry, one question for you. So you put here on the agenda: will subsidies rise for heat pumps and insulation? What do
I
you
mean, they'll
mean?
have to. I think.
Well, to support if we're trying to improve and get to 100%, we need to do something.
The
need to encourage
UK
people.
houses, because they're old and not really built for energy efficiency, or built for energy efficiency 100 years ago, they need to be improved, which means that the government is going to have to put more money into.
But also it's going to have to be upfront money. So at the moment, the RHI is paid back over 7 years, right? So if I want, moving away from the speaker. So if you want someone to install a heat pump, for example, that person needs to either get an incredibly cheap loan, or they need to find 10k for a air source heat pump, but 20k for a ground source heat pump.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not realistic. So I can't see. So you can rise, take subsidies up, but the only people that is going to help is people who have the money to install these things anyway.